opposite here. So what's going on, and why is the market bracing itself for an outright war? Maybe because it doesn't see one here. I'm talking about a trade war. Let's get the read from D.R. Barton, the MoneyMorning.com chief technical analyst. Bryan Riley joining us, National Taxpayers Union Free Trade Initiative director, and Gabby Maranghello, the Washington Examiner White House reporter. Gabby, what's going on here? Because this doesn't seem to jibe with what you think would be the predictable reaction out of stocks.
Well, there was a bit of a dip earlier this week when the president announced that he was going to be imposing an additional tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods, but it does seem to have corrected itself, and there isn't as much concern about the impact on the economy that this trade dispute, as the administration calls it, is going to have, as critics of President Trump have suggested it would. The administration feels that they can sustain this trade dispute because the U.S. economy is strong, that we're creating jobs, that our GDP is up, that we are in a good position to be making these demands from China and the European Union, and that even if this does somehow disrupt our economy, the market will correct itself, and I think that's what we're seeing happen here.
D.R. Barton, can you even play the trade move one way or the other in the markets? I think it's a fool's gold here and probably a fool's mission, but it is noisy, isn't it?
It does make for a lot of noise, Neil. And I'll tell you that if you're a short-term trader, I think buying these little pullbacks has been a successful strategy, especially if you get into the right indexes. The Russell is actually up since the trade tariff. The small cap index is actually up since the tariffs were first announced 8 days ago, last Thursday. So I think if you're a longer-term investor, certainly stay away of trying to trade this. But the fine point is that the S&P and the Dow are only down a couple of percent. If we were expecting a big full-blown trade war, they'd be down much more.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Bryan, I'm looking at this, too, from maybe the trust the markets seem to be placing in the president. They've doubted him before. They've got panicky before, and the markets have roared back. Things have stabilized. That can't always be the case, I know, but it's the only way I can explain this, to D.R.'s point, this predictable reaction we get.
Well, if you look at specific sectors, look at soybean futures, look at corn prices, look at the impact this is having on farmers and ranchers. If you're a small manufacturer in Hutchinson, Kansas, or Poplar Bluff, Missouri, the administration seems to just view you as collateral damage. They don't care what happens.
In other words, all those prices you alluded to, namely the agricultural items, they've been tumbling. The markets are drying up for these farmers, right?
Absolutely, and it's clear this is a failed strategy. Peter Navarro promised that other countries would not retaliate. You went down the list of countries retaliating. Right. We're looking at about $75 billion in retaliation against the U.S. And the idea that we're stronger than you, so we can punch you and you punch back, it won't be quite as hard. We still both wind up with a black eye. It doesn't make any sense.
Gabby, I'm wondering where this is going here, because we have a lot of deadlines without getting too much into the weeds. There's a July 1st deadline, a first wave of tariffs that kick in for some countries, a July 6th wave, an end of July wave, and then the countries that are in question, India, that's a July 10th development. Again, I could go on and on just to mention these dates that are going to come and fly, but it's going to be an opportunity for these countries, including our own, to be called on our respective bluffs. So what happens?
Yeah, I think the administration is barreling towards a lot of these deadlines that they have set themselves, and they have to make a decision whether or not they want to continue to level tariffs on these countries and face the prospect of retaliatory measures being taken. Obviously, the concern that was there initially that the European Union and that China and India and Canada and Mexico would all respond to the earlier tariffs that were imposed with their own measures ended up becoming a reality, and now the administration is grappling with that. And so I do think that that's going to be taken into account as they move forward. That being said, they don't seem to be getting out of negotiations that are ongoing what they want to, and so that would suggest that this trade dispute is only going to be going on for the remainder of the summer, if not well into the fall.
D.R. Barton, looking at this, the argument is always, and the president has used this, that all of these countries, chiefly China, are far more vulnerable to a trade war than we are. We would be damaged less than they would be, and so it's in China's interest to do something. Do you buy that, and is that the line, given the fact that a lot of Asian markets, particularly China's, have tumbled far more than ours since all of this began?
Yeah, Neil, you know, the numbers are very, very clear. You look at the World Trade Organization numbers, the CIA fact book numbers. China exports 45% more than the U.S. exports, and we import 35% more than they do. So clearly the president sees that he has a strong negotiating stance here, and he seems to be playing that out. And if you look at the language,
I think he's overplaying it. This is something I agree with Bryan on, and I'll get to him in a second on this. The president might be getting too cocky about this, reading the economic numbers, reading the fact that the Chinese haven't yet responded to the latest threat of $200 billion in additional tariffs, and that they're blinking. I don't know if they're blinking, and I don't know if he is in the position of strength he thinks he is. But that's just my opinion. What do you think?
Well, your point's well made, Neil. And the two things that make me think that he's playing this from a position of strength and definitely from a negotiating position, not intending to have these tariffs go through. He's already said he'd like more free trade. Is number one, the language he uses. He said we hope the EU will end these soon, not a deadline, not like a hard and fast thing. And also, once again, back to the point, the markets don't really seem to be pricing in any kind of trade war.
Yeah, no, so far you're right about that. But Bryan, to touch on what I just said and what you said really at the outset here, this idea that these things can get worse, and a lot of the impact is real now. Could I ask you about the Chinese not responding in kind to the threat on the part of the president? I'm thinking about $200 billion in additional tariffs on you. You even think about going that route with me. I'm going to call for another $200 billion, and they have not. They have not responded to that. They've verbally gone back and attacked that line, but they haven't come back. So what do you read into that?
Well, I think they're going to wait and see. And with respect to China, if you want to encourage change in China, you don't start a trade fight with Canada and Europe and Japan and all of our allies. That strategy makes zero sense to me. And even aside from retaliation, there are 20,000 requests for exclusion from steel and aluminum tariffs from American companies that the Commerce Department has. They've approved 42 out of 20,000 requests for exclusion from tariffs from U.S. companies that are being hurt. These tariffs hurt us even aside from the retaliation that's coming. It's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of how much we're going to hurt ourselves. I really think the president needs to hire some new trade advisors to prevent him from continuing to go down this road.
All right, we'll watch closely. To all of your point, I mean, the impact that some fear hasn't materialized yet, but again, markets sometimes can be wrong. We'll see what happens. In the meantime, with the Dow up about 166.5 points, there is that separate battle on immigration.